Hey everybody, this is Perch. Let's see what we got here. All right, so this is a conversation that I think's been had a lot, and the question is basically how many of these new heroes will be classics? All right, so right now what we're seeing is kind of this desire for Marvel, and there's a bunch of things that go into it, but from the big two, from Image, from different companies, like how do we make the franchises of tomorrow? How do we make the Spider-Mans, Batmans, etc.? A lot of these are long in the tooth. I mean, look, you're looking at Superman, it's what, 80 years, 90 years? I mean, anyway, he's been going for a while. In fact, I can't pull that number off the top of my head. It's embarrassing, but like, I'll bet, you know what? I'll bet others of you have done this too. It's like, wait a minute, he was hanging around in World War II. So if we go back, that was the 40s. And then, anyway, sorry. Regardless, these characters have been around for a while. So the idea is like, hey, we got to get some new heroes in here. And that's why we're doing what we're doing with all of these different characters, Marvel and DC alike. Lazarus Planet. We're gonna get some new classic characters, everyone's favorite character. And there have been some hits over the last 30 years. Harley Quinn, I think, is clearly at this point is gonna survive the test of time. Deadpool as well. But a lot of heroes won't. Will Miss Marvel? Will Kamala Khan make it? Will Sideways make it? Will that Hulk thing that was part of DC's, Heroes of Tomorrow that everybody's kind of forgotten about? What about the Hulk Wolverine hybrid guy? What about him? Is he going to be around? I'm thinking he's not going to be around in 80 years. But anyway, but how many of these will be classics? So here's a mail from a viewer. It says, "Hey, Perch, you talk a lot about how new characters and how many of them will age like milk. I mostly agree, and this is coming from someone who loved the New Age of Heroes." Yeah, that was that imprint. Yeah. Those were some new characters who I thought were fun and larger than life, but I don't think even those have staying power. Part of the problem with new heroes for me is that so many creators think the best way to make a young hero relatable is to have their costume be some kind of street clothes, cheap copy of a superhero costume. This is something that worked in the golden age for the JSA, but modern creators just don't seem to be able to get it right. By the way, on the topic of a costume, that's a great point. I mean, costumes need to be able to be iconic when you're designing them. If you're designing things that are current trend fashionable, they don't work. And, case in point, Rob Liefeld obviously created some characters that are surviving the test of time that are big deals, Cable, Deadpool, etc. But look at Deadpool. Deadpool's costume has mostly remained exactly the same, with a couple variants here or there. It's mainly been the same outfit. Deadpool, the character, was created a long time ago. At the same time, there were all these images of Rob Liefeld's costumes for X-Force, and there's like a sketchbook stuff that they didn't sell, but they had the back things, and he was creating these costumes and everything else, and they were very modern, sensible. Meaning they look like kind of 90s outfits. They had this very modern take on New Mutant clothing. Well, in 2023, most of those costumes have been retired and or forgotten, and we're right back to kind of variants on the costumes that existed back in the 80s. That's where that progressed to, kind of the yellow and black. And so what do you make of that? Well, if you're creating a new hero and you go all in on a costume that's going to look really trendy and current popular, you could do that. Nobody's saying Rob Liefeld couldn't create things. Again, obviously he did, Deadpool and other characters, but Deadpool's costume is fairly timeless. It looked, it had a few more pouches back in the day, so you can kind of remove some of those pouches. I mean but it works. At the core of it, it works. And if you're going to create a new character, you have to make sure that costume does survive 10 years. And as it turns out, fashions do change pretty frequently. I recently went to a generations party, and there's a bunch of white people all dressed up in clothes from their generations. And everybody's like, "Look at me, I'm dressed like the 90s. I've got a tracksuit on, hilarious." But you don't see people wandering around like that. One thing about Texas, by the way, different from Seattle, is in Texas, every now and then I go to Target and there's like a girl there and she's just wearing like jogging pants and a bra. And just, it's a fairly wealthy area. She's going with it. You wouldn't see it in Seattle. So wouldn't want to see it in Seattle half the time. Anyway, back to the mail. It says, anyway, my question is, how many of these heroes will be classics in 10, 20, or 30 years? Can you think of any comics from the last 10 years that you think will be people's holy grail comics in another 20? I'm sure some would say Miles Morales, but with him, he feels dependent on other media like games and movies. I don't really see as much hype for him in the comics. So yeah, Miles Morales to me is probably the one that will make it. I think that, and you say you can't count the games and the movies, except why not? I mean, one of the reasons why Spider-Man is popular is that he was showing up in the Electric Company and he had his Spider-Man Amazing Friends cartoon, and it wasn't just the comics that got him embedded into people's minds. It was all these things, and they count. All these things count. So I think you can't dismiss them. They definitely are relevant. So and I think that's part of the game. If you can get the character kind of into a bunch of different other forms of media, that definitely helps. I think there have been some comics. Again, I think if you're talking 20 or 30 years later, like runs people will remember, I think that Snyder's and Capullo's Batman is going to be there. The whole Court of Owls thing that's gonna be remembered. I think that there's an off chance that Tinian's Joker War and some of his stuff will go, but he's also like just slamming in all these new characters and IP like Ghostmaker and Miracle Molly and all these other characters that definitely won't survive the test of time. I mean, they may be around, but they're not going to be anybody's favorite. Ghostmaker, I think, has some potential to get there, but no, not at that kind of level. But there's a possibility you could get Deadpool like popular and put him in the hands of somebody who's going to really dedicate time, maybe. But those runs will do that. Other stuff. I mean, there's comics that are good. Look, I like the Phil Kennedy Johnson Superman on War World, but I also think it's hard for that one to survive the test of time. When we say survive the test of time, I mean, like, collectors will look back and be like, oh yeah, that was an excellent run. We do that for all kinds of comics back in the 70s. I love that Legion of Superheroes 5 years later run. It's a great run of comics. It isn't you don't see it on the shelves at Barnes and Noble. But that doesn't mean it's bad. But think about that. It's a high bar. I love the Justice League International, the Wahaha era of the Justice League. You also don't usually see that in Amazon stores or Barnes and Noble either. Now, but I mean, that's a fondly remembered run. But does it cross over into the mega mainstream like Craven's Last Hunt did, and the original Secret Wars did, and Civil War, the first one did? Those comics all went big, and they will be remembered 20, 30 years from now. They will be still sold and in those places alongside Watchmen, Born Again, the Daredevil run. I mean, there's some that have just gone to that extra level. But in terms of current characters, I think Miles Morales is a lock. I think Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, probably does get there, but it needs another G. Willow Wilson level of writer to come in and do 50 issues where they just work on the character. With Miss Marvel, it feels to me like they are learning from the mistake of Carol Danvers and what they did with Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel, they want to make her a big deal, and Bendis kicked this off by, it's like, she's the most popular hero everywhere. Everybody loved her. And then people jumped on like that was the status quo. We've got to make sure everybody loves Captain Marvel, everybody. And the fastest way to get people not to accept things in comics is to tell them what they need to do. And so I think they built up Carol Danvers like, well, she's clearly the leader of the Avengers, most popular character in the world, defending the entire universe from space. I mean, she is the mega character of all mega characters. I think that's a big problem. Kamala Khan, they were definitely going in that direction, with what Mark Waid was doing when she was in the Avengers and then in the Champions. Like, she's a leader. And it took all the charm away from the character. One of the good things that Wilson did in her run was that you had Kamala as a workable kind of character that was not great at what she did, but tried her best, and building up the surrounding people around her, and even that run that I do think was bad and derailed the character to some extent, where she was put in charge of prison and imprisoning her friends. Even that, it was an example. Like, she walked away from that having fucked it up. Like, her friends were reminding her about this like a dozen issues later, and she was ashamed, and it was bad. Captain Marvel, on the other hand, was doing the same thing, And they just like, well, that's in the rearview mirror now. We'll move it on. She killed Tony. Fuck it. Let's go. So I think that with Kamala Khan, I think there was somebody at Marvel who's like, let's pull off the gas there a little bit and remember that we have time with this character. Let's build her up as, kind of youthful, overexcited, making mistakes. That's going to be better for that character. And if they stay on that track and they put in the work, then I do think that character gets there and somebody that will kind of survive the test of time. But there's not many. Over on DC, not really any. I think Ghostmaker could, if a lot of work was put into it, do it. We'll see what they do with these super twins that have been introduced over in Action Comics. Maybe something there. I don't know. But the thing is, you have to treat the characters with some respect. You have to let them build up. You cannot do things like have what they're Leah Williams doing the boob sweat jokes in Power Girl. That stuff, it's funny to you. It's not funny to the masses. Some people go to like, oh, it's funny, boob sweat. Oh yeah, boob sweat. And then, but that's not a joke that ages well. It doesn't help the character. It's like when you have, Laura Kinney going, sup, bitches? How about that guy over there watching us pee on each other? He's a little pee-pee boy. Like that stuff, it makes the creator giggle. It makes some of their followers on Twitter giggle. I think it's kryptonite to having these characters go over long term because, it's dated, grown humor. And sadly, today's oh so edgy boob sweat joke is tomorrow's dad joke because that's how it ages. It's just painful. So I don't know. Miles Morales is probably the biggest bet. Again, Kamala Khan could get there. There's a possibility. There's other characters, and remember, there's characters and stories that we'll remember. And by the way, if you get out of Marvel and DC, which is always good, Saga had its shot. I think Saga, the hiatus absolutely cut the legs out from under that book, and it came back weird. And I think they killed off a major character that was a terrible idea to do. I think it took the heart out of that book in a lot of ways. So I think Saga is, they're trying with Radiant Black to build up a little shared universe. I don't see it, honestly. It's got some fans, but it's hit a ceiling. There's other stuff out there. I mean, there's a lot of great books. It's just, it's a big difference between a great book and something that's going to survive the test of time in a huge way with, people coming into the comics for the first time. You can see people coming into comics for the first time and going, I'm going to read this trade paperback of Miles Morales and his origin and going like, okay, I want to keep following this character. You can't see them doing that, even finding some of these other characters. And the New Age of Heroes is a great idea, executed terribly, for sure. Anyway, thank you very much for the mail. Curious what you think. Who'd I forget? I'm sure I forget all kinds of people. And thanks for listening.